Hello guys, today we're going to be reading 1 Samuel chapter 15 to 21, and this is going to include David versus Goliath. It's going to be awesome. So, let's get right into it. Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 from Judah. Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in a ravine. Then he said to the Kenites, Go away, leave the Amalekites so that I do not destroy you along with them. For you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites moved away from the Amalekites. Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with a sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak they totally destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all that night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told, Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor, and has turned and gone on down to Gilgal. When Samuel reached him, Saul said, The Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions. But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear? Saul answered, The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest. Enough, Samuel said to Saul. Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Tell me, Saul replied. Samuel said, Although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission, saying, Go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you have wiped them out. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? But I did obey the Lord, Saul said. I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag the king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. But Samuel replied, Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I have violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men, and so I gave in to them. Now I beg you, forgive my sin, and come back with me, so that I may worship the Lord. But Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. As Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught hold of the hem of his robe, and it tore. Samuel said to him, The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you. He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not a human being that he should change his mind. Saul replied, I have sinned, but please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God. So Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul worshipped the Lord. Then Samuel said, Bring me Agag, king of the Amalekites. Agag came to him in chains, and he thought, Surely the bitterness of death is past. But Samuel said, As your sword has made women childless, so will your mother be childless among women. And Samuel put Agag to death before the Lord at Gilgal. Then Samuel left for Ramah, but Samuel went up to his home in Gibeah of Saul. Verse 34. Then Samuel left for Ramah, but Saul went up to his home in Gibeah of Saul. Until the day Samuel died, he did not go to see Saul again. Now Samuel mourned for him, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. The Lord said to Samuel, How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king. But Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me. The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, Are these all the sons you have?" "They are still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Saul's attendants said to him, "See, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord command his servants here to search for someone who can play the lyre. He will play when the evil spirit from God comes on you, and you will feel better." So Saul said to his attendants, "Find someone who plays well and bring him to me." One of his servants answered, "I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. He is a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is a fine-looking man, and the Lord is with him." Then Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me your son David, who is with the sheep." So Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them with his son David to Saul. David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor-bearers. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, saying, "Allow David to remain in my service, for I am pleased with him." Whenever the Spirit from God came on Saul, David would take up his lyre and play, then relief would come to Saul. He would feel better, and the evil spirit would leave. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Socoh and Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim, between Socoh and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore a coat of scale. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was the son of the Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to the camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of the unit. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them." They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. Early in the morning David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up, and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here?" Alright, she can come in here, right? She can come in here, right?
I got some candy.
Alright,
This is small.
okay. I'm gonna continue reading, alright, Ayla? When Eliab, David's older brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of the Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it." I'll be right back. Study 6 of chapter 17. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." And Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go on these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sharim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." After David had finished talking to Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul, with singing and dancing, with joyful songs, and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. "They have credited David with tens of thousands," he thought, "but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom?" And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the lyre as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, "I'll pin David to the wall." But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but he had departed from Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men. And David led the troops in their campaigns. And everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." For Saul said to himself, "I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines do that." But David said to Saul, "Who am I, and what is my family and my clan in Israel, that I should become the king's son-in-law?" So when the time came for Merab, Saul's daughter, to be given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel of Meholah. Now Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. "I will give her to him," he thought, "so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." So Saul said to David, "Now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law." And Saul ordered his attendants, "Speak to David privately and say, 'Look, the king likes you, and his attendants all love you. Now become his son-in-law.'" They repeated these words to David, but David said, "Do you think it is a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I'm only a poor man and little known." When Saul's servants told him what David had said, Saul replied to say to David, "The king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. When the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. So before the allotted time elapsed, David took his men with him and went out and killed 200 Philistines and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number to the king so that David might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy the rest of his days. The Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David met with more success. Then the rest of Saul's officers and his name became well known. Saul told his son Jonathan and all his attendants to kill David, but Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning, go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out." Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father and said to him, "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason?" Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. Once more war broke out, and David went out and fought the Philistines. He struck them with such force that they fled before him. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand. While David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him up to the wall with his spear, but David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape. Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, "If you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be killed." So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. And Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed, covering it with a garment and putting some goat's hair at the head. When Saul sent the men to capture David, Michal said, "He is ill." Then Saul sent the men back to see David and told them, "Bring him up to me in his bed so that I may kill him." But when the men entered, there was the idol in the bed, and at the head was some goat's hair. Saul said to Michal, "Why do you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escapes?" Michal told him, "He said to me, 'Let me get away. Why should I kill you?'" When David has fled and made his escape, he went to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul has done to him. Then he and Samuel went to Naioth and stayed there. Word came to Saul, "David is in Naioth at Ramah." So he sent men to capture him, but when they saw a group of prophets prophesying when Samuel was standing there as the leader, the Spirit of God came on Saul's men, and they also prophesied. Saul was told about it, and he sent more men, and they prophesied too. Saul sent men a third time, and they also prophesied. Finally, he himself left for Ramah and went to the great cistern at Secu, and he asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" "Over Naioth at Ramah," they said. So Saul went to Naioth at Ramah, but the Spirit of God came even on him, and he walked along prophesying until he came to Naioth. He stripped off his garments, and he too prophesied in Samuel's presence. He lay naked all that day and all that night. This is why people say, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" Then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he is trying to kill me?" "Never," Jonathan replied. "You are not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so." But David took an oath and said, "Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he has said to himself, "Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, there is only a step between me and death." Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you." So David said, "Look, tomorrow is the new moon feast, and I'm supposed to dine with the king, but let me go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. If your father misses me at all, tell him, 'David honestly asked my permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because an annual sacrifice is being made there for his whole clan.' If he says, 'Very well,' then your servant is safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he is determined to harm me. As for you, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I am guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father?" "Never," Jonathan said. "If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you?" David asked, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" "Come," Jonathan said, "let's go out into the field." So they went there together. Then Jonathan said to David, "I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, that I will surely sound out my father by this time the day after tomorrow. If he is favorably disposed towards you, will I not send you word and let you know? But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan be ever so severely. If I do not let you know and send you away in peace, may the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. Then Jonathan said to David, "Tomorrow is the new moon feast. You will be missed, because your seat will be empty. The day after tomorrow, toward evening, go to the place where you hid when this trouble began, and wait by the stone Ezel. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I was shooting at a target. Then I will send a boy and say, 'Go find the arrows.' If I say to him, 'Look, the arrows are on this side of you, bring them here.' Then came, because as surely as the Lord lives, you are safe. There is no danger. But if I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then you must go, because the Lord has sent you away. And about the matter you and I discussed, remember, the Lord is witness between you and me forever." So David hid in the field, and when the new moon feast came, the king sat down to eat. He sat in his customary place by the wall, opposite Jonathan, and Abner sat next to Saul, but David's place was empty. Saul said nothing that day, for he thought something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he is unclean. But the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. And Saul said to his son Jonathan, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the mill either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered, "David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go, because our family is observing a sacrifice in the town, and my brother has ordered me to be there. If I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers.' That is why he has not come to the king's table." Saul's anger fled up at Jonathan. He said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die." "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. And Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger. On that second day of the feast, he did not eat, because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David. He had a small boy with him, and he said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out after him, "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" And he shouted, "Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." The boy picked up the arrow and returned to his master. The boy knew nothing about all this, only Jonathan and David knew. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said, "Go carry them back to town." After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times, with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. David went to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" David answered Ahimelech the priest, "The king sent me on a mission and said to me, 'No one is to know anything about the mission I am sending you on. As for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you can find." But the priest answered David, "I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women." David replied, "Indeed, women have been kept from us as usual whenever I set out. The men's bodies are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today?" So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away. Now one of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before the Lord. He was Doeg, the Edomite, Saul's chief shepherd. David asked Ahimelech, "Don't you have a spear or a sword here?" "I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon, because the king's mission was urgent." The priest replied, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one." David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." That day David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, "Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be insane in their presence, and while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, "Look at this man. He is insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house?" Alright, okay. That's the chapters 15 to 21. So, what happened? And these Samuel's just one of my favorite books of the Bible. It's unexplainably favorite. Let's go to chapter 15, verses 2 and 3 real quick. Alright, chapter 15, verses 2 and 3 says, this is what the Lord Almighty says, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them, put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Why did God command such utter destruction? The Amalekites were a band of guerrilla terrorists. They lived by attacking other nations and carrying off their wealth and their families. They had been the first to attack the Israelites as they had entered the Promised Land, and they continued to raid Israelite camps at every opportunity. God knew that the Israelites could never live peacefully in the Promised Land as long as the Amalekites existed. He also knew that their corrupt, idolatrous religious practices threatened Israel's relationship with him. The only way to protect the Israelites' bodies and souls was to utterly destroy the people of the warlike nation and all their possessions, including their idols. Verse 9 says, if I can find it, but Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat cows and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak they totally destroyed. Saul and his men did not destroy all the plunder from the battle as God had commanded them to do. The law of devoting something, setting it aside entirely for destruction, was well known to the Israelites. Anything under God's ban was to be completely destroyed. This was set up in order to prevent idolatry from taking hold in Israel, because many of the valuables were idols. To break this law was punishable by death. It showed disrespect and disregard for God because it directly violated one of his commands. When we gloss over sin in order to protect what we have or for material gain, we aren't being shrewd. We are disobeying God. Selective obedience is just another form of disobedience. Verse 11 and also 35 says, I regret that I have made Saul king because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry and he cried out to the Lord all that night. Verse 35 says, until the day Samuel died, he did not go to see Saul again, though Samuel mourned for him, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. When God said he regretted that he made Saul king, was he saying he made a mistake? God's comment was an expression of sorrow, not an admission of error. An omniscient God cannot make a mistake. Therefore, God did not change his mind. He did, however, change his way of relating to Saul when Saul changed. Saul's heart no longer belonged to God but to his own interest. Verse 12 says, early in the morning Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone on down to Gilgal. Saul built a monument in honor of himself. What a contrast to Moses and Joshua, who gave all the credit to God. Awards and accolades feel good, but we must maintain an honest estimate of ourselves. We can be thankful for what we accomplish, but we must also recognize God's role in helping us. Verse 13 and 14 says, when Samuel reached him, Saul said, the Lord bless you, I have carried out the Lord's instructions. But Samuel said, what then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear? Saul thought he had won a great victory over the Amalekites, but God saw it as a great failure because Saul had disobeyed him and then lied to Samuel about the results of the battle. Saul may have thought his lie wouldn't be detected or that what he did was not wrong, but Saul was deceiving himself. Dishonest people soon begin to believe that lies they construct around themselves. Then they lose the ability to tell the difference between truth and lies. By believing your own lies, you deceive yourself. You will alienate yourself from God, and you will lose credibility in all your relationships. In the long run, honesty wins out, even when it is inconvenient or unflattering. Verse 15 says, Saul answered, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest. Saul disobeyed God and kept part of the spoils, including the choicest livestock. When Samuel arrived, he could see and hear the evidence of Saul's wrong actions. When confronted, Saul claimed that the spoils they kept were going to be sacrificed to God. That is like saying, but I only stole the money so I could put it in the offering plate. Obeying God is always better than disobeying him, even when you do a supposedly noble deed. Verse 22 to 23 says, but Samuel replied, Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and the heat is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Rebellion and arrogance are serious sins. They involve far more than being independent and strong-willed. Scripture equates them with divination, witchcraft, and idolatry, sins worthy of death. Saul became both rebellious and arrogant, so it is little wonder that God finally rejected him and took away his kingdom. Rebellion against God is perhaps the most serious sin of all, because as long as a person rebels, he or she closes the door to forgiveness and restoration with God. This is the first of numerous places in the Bible where the theme to obey is better than sacrifice is stated. Was Samuel saying that sacrifice is unimportant? No, he was urging Saul to look at his reasons for making the sacrifice rather than at the sacrifice itself. A sacrifice was a ritual transaction between a person and God that physically demonstrated a relationship between them. But if the person's heart was not truly repentant, or if he or she did not truly love God, the sacrifice was a hollow ritual. Religious ceremonies or rituals are empty unless they are performed with an attitude of love and obedience. Being religious, like going to church, serving on a committee, giving to charity, is not enough if we do not act out of devotion and obedience to God. Verse 26 says, But Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king of Israel. Saul's excuses had come to an end, and the time of reckoning had come. God wasn't rejecting Saul as a person. The king could still have sought forgiveness and restored his relationship with God, but it was too late to get his kingdom back. If you do not act responsibly with what God has entrusted to you, eventually you will run out of chances to keep it. All of us must one day give an account for our actions. At the same time, when we follow God, we may lose our reputations, possessions, or careers, but those are nothing compared to the eternal life we gain. Verse 30 says, Saul replied, I have sinned, but please honor me before the elders of my people, and before Israel. Come back with me, so that I may worship the Lord your God. Saul was more concerned about what others would think of him than he was about the status of his relationship with God. He begged Samuel to go with him to worship as a public demonstration that Samuel still supported him. If Samuel had refused, the people probably would have lost all confidence in Saul. Verse 4-5 of chapter 16 says, Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, Do you come in peace? Samuel replied, Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. The elders were afraid because they knew of the split between Samuel and Saul, and they did not want repercussions. Samuel consecrated Jesse and his son to prepare them to come before God and worship and to offer a sacrifice. Verse 7 says, But the Lord said to Samuel, Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Saul was tall and handsome, an impressive-looking man. Samuel may have been trying to find someone who looked like Saul to be Israel's next king. But God warned him against judging by appearance. When people judge by outward appearance, they may overlook quality in individuals who lack the particular physical qualities society currently admires. But appearance doesn't reveal what people are really like or what their true value is. Fortunately, God judges by faith and character, not appearance. Because only God can see what's on the inside, only he can accurately judge people. Most people spend hours each week maintaining their outward appearance. They should do even more to develop their inner character. While everyone can see your face, only you and God know what your heart really looks like. What steps are you taking to improve the attractiveness of your heart in God's eyes? Verse 13 says, So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. David was anointed king, but it was done in secret. He was not publicly anointed until much later. Saul was still legally the king, but God was preparing David for his future responsibilities. The anointing oil poured over David's head stood for holiness. It was used to set people or objects apart for God's service. Each king and high priest of Israel was anointed with oil. This commissioned them as God's representatives to the nation. Although God rejected Saul's kingship by not allowing any of his descendants to sit on Israel's throne, Saul remained in his position until his death. Verse 14 says, Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. What was the evil spirit the Lord sent? Perhaps Saul was deeply depressed, or perhaps when the Holy Spirit left Saul, God allowed an evil spirit or a demon to torment him as judgment for his disobedience. This would demonstrate God's power over the spirit world. Either way, Saul was driven to madness and paranoia, which led him to attempt to murder David multiple times. Verse 15 to 16 says, Saul's attendant said to him, "See, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord command his servants here to search for someone who can play the lyre. He will play when the evil spirit from God comes on you, and you will feel better." Lyres were popular musical instruments in Saul's day, and their music is still known for its soothing qualities. The simplest lyres were merely two pieces of wood fastened at right angles to each other. The strings were stretched across the wood to give the lyre a triangular shape. Simple strings could be made of twisted grasses, but better strings were made of dried animal intestines. Lyres were 4 to 8 stringed instruments, smaller than harps, which had 10 to 13 strings. David, known for his shepherding skills and bravery, was also an accomplished harpist and musician who would eventually write many of the psalms found in the Bible. Verses 19 to 21 says, "Then Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, 'Send me your son David, who is with the sheep.' So Jesse took a donkey, loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them with his son David to Saul. David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor bearers." When Saul asked David to be in his service, he obviously did not know that David had been secretly anointed king. Saul's invitation presented an excellent opportunity for the young man and future king to gain first-hand information about leading an army and building a nation. Sometimes our plans, even the ones we think God has approved, have to be put on hold indefinitely. And sometimes our plans get interrupted or don't develop as quickly as we desire. Like David, we can use this waiting time profitably. We can choose to learn and grow in our present circumstances, whatever they may be. Verses 4 through 7 of chapter 17 says, "A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him." When they had first approached the promised land, most of the Israelites had been afraid to enter because of the giants living there. King Og of Bashan needed a bed over 13 feet long. Now Goliath, who was over 9 feet tall, taunted Israel's soldiers and appeared invincible to them. Saul, the tallest of the Israelites, may have been especially worried because he was obviously the best match for Goliath. In God's eyes, however, Goliath was no different than anyone else. Verse 9 says, "If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." An army often avoided the high cost of battle by pitting its strongest warrior against the strongest warrior of the enemy. This avoided great bloodshed because the winner of the fight would be considered the winner of the battle. Goliath had the definite advantage against David from a physical standpoint, but Goliath didn't realize that in fighting David, he also had to fight God. Verse 16 says, "For 40 days the Philistines came forward every morning and evening and took a stand." Why would this go on for 40 days without one side attacking the other? They were camped on opposite sides of a valley with steep walls. Whoever would rush down the valley and up the steep cliffs would be at a disadvantage at the beginning of the battle and probably suffer great casualties. Each side was waiting for the other to attack first. Verse 26 says, "David asked the men standing near him, 'What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?'" What a different perspective can make. Most of the onlookers saw only a giant. David, however, saw a mortal man defying Almighty God, and Goliath was a target too big to miss. David knew he would not be alone when he faced Goliath. God would fight with him. He looked at the Israelites' army's situation from God's point of view. Who or what are the giants you are facing? Viewing impossible situations from God's point of view helps us put giant problems in perspective. Once we see clearly, we can fight more effectively. Verse 28 to 32 says, "When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, 'Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle.' 'Now what have I done?' said David. 'Can't I even speak?' He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart. On account of this Philistine, your servant will go and fight him." Criticism couldn't stop David. While the rest of the army stood around, he knew the importance of taking action. With God to fight for him, there is no reason to wait. People may try to discourage you with negative comments or mockery, but continue to do what you know is right. By doing what is right, you will be pleasing God, whose opinion matters most. Verse 48 to 49 says, as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. David was able to move faster than Goliath because David carried no heavy weapons or armor. David was an expert marksman with a sling, and as he advanced on Goliath, he stayed out of range of Goliath's huge weapons. What made David effective, however, was more than his ability with a sling. It was his courage and his faith in God. To fight like David, we need David's kind of fearlessness. David had grown strong in his confidence by trusting God when he had encountered wild animals while guarding his father's sheep. When you face towering problems, recall how God has helped you in the past. Take heart because God gives you strength. Use these skills God has already given you and move forward. Verse 55 to 58 says, as Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." Although David was playing his lyre many times in front of Saul, Saul's question to Abner seems to show he didn't know David very well. Perhaps since David was scheduled to marry Saul's daughter, if he was successful, Saul wanted to know more about his family, or possibly Saul's unstable mental condition may have prevented him from recognizing David in a different context. Verses 2-4 of chapter 18 says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off his robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. 1 second. So when David and Jonathan met, they became close friends at once. Their friendship is one of the deepest and closest recorded in the Bible because they based their friendship on commitment to God, not just each other. They let nothing come between them, not even career or family problems. They drew closer together, but their friendship was tested, and they remained friends to the end. Jonathan, the prince of Israel, later realized that David, and not he, would be the next king. But that did not weaken his love for David. Jonathan would much rather lose the throne of Israel than lose his closest friend. Verses 8-9 says, Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Saul's appreciation for David turned to jealousy as people began to applaud David's exploits. In a jealous rage, Saul attempted to murder David by hurling his spear at him. Jealousy may not seem to be a major sin, but in reality it is one step short of murder. Jealousy starts out as you resent a rival. It leads to your wishing he or she were removed, then it manifests itself in you seeking ways to harm that person in word or action. Be careful not to let jealousy get a foothold in your life. If you remember, we talked about the same things whenever Cain killed Abel back in Genesis. First video on Genesis, I think. So, verse 11-12 says, and he heard it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. Saul tried to kill David because he was jealous of David's popularity. David was greatly loved by Jonathan, Saul's son, Michal, Saul's daughter, and all the people. Yet despite Saul's attacks on David, he continued to protect and comfort Saul. Perhaps people have been jealous of you and have even attacked you in some way. They may be intimidated by your strengths, which make them conscious of their own shortcomings. It would be natural to strike back or to avoid them. A better response is to befriend them, as God says in Matthew. Well, Jesus, same guy, you know. Jesus says to turn the other cheek and to reconcile with them as well. Ask God to open the door of opportunity for friendship with them and to give you the strength to continue to show them love, just as David did with Saul. Verse 15-18 says, We're in chapter 18 still, by the way. It says, when Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. Saul said to David, "Here's my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." For Saul said to himself, "I will not raise a hand against him, let the Philistines do that." But David said to Saul, "Who am I, and what is my family or my clan in Israel, that I should become the king's son-in-law?" So, while Saul's popularity made him proud and arrogant, David remained humble. I think David is one of the best examples of humbleness in the Bible. Even when he remained humble, even when the nation began to praise him. Although David succeeded in almost everything, he tried and became famous throughout the land. He refused to use his popular support to his advantage against Saul. It can be tempting to allow popularity to twist the perception of your own importance. Being humble is fairly easy when you're not on center stage, but how will you react to praise and honor? You shouldn't become prideful. You should give all that praise and honor to God. Praise and honor, we don't deserve any of it. We're flesh and we're sin. God is spirit and he's perfect. He deserves the praise and honor, not us. So now we move on to chapter 19, and Saul begins to try and murder David. Verses 1 to 2 says, Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there." Is it ever right to disobey your parent or guardian, as Jonathan did here? It is clearly a principle of Scripture that when a parent or guardian instructs his or her child to break God's law, the child should obey God rather than a human being. This principle assumes that the child is old enough to be accountable and to see through any deception. A child's role is to be respectful, helpful, and obedient to his or her parents, but not to follow advice or commands that violate God's laws. Jonathan recognized David's anointing from God and his superior leadership qualities. If you remember yesterday's video, we talked about that with the government, that we're supposed to submit to the government, but if they go against God's laws, we don't have to. We don't have to submit to the government then. So, verse 19 to 24, which is on the next page actually, says, word came to Saul, "David is in Naioth at Ramah." So he sent men to capture him, but when they saw a group of prophets prophesying, with Samuel standing there as their leader, the Spirit of God came on Saul's men, and they also prophesied. Saul was told about it, and he sent more men, and they prophesied too. Saul sent men a third time, and they also prophesied. Finally, he himself left for Ramah and went to the great cistern at Seku, and he asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" "Over in Naioth at Ramah," they said. So Saul went to Naioth at Ramah, but the Spirit of God came even on him, and he walked along prophesying until he came to Naioth. He stripped off his garments, and he too prophesied in Samuel's presence. He lay naked all that day and all that night. This is why people say, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" This was the second time that Saul surprised everyone by joining a group of prophets and prophesying. We do not know if they were speaking messages from God or merely joining in ecstatic expression. The first time this happened to Saul was right after he was anointed king and did not want to accept the responsibility. Now we see that he has accepted the responsibility, but he is consumed with jealousy over David's growing popularity. But the Spirit of God immobilized him, so he was unable to harm David. Although Saul was receptive to the Spirit of God, he was caught up in prophesying. His heart and mind were far from loving God and thinking like him. Jonathan spoke up for David. Michal helped him escape. Samuel gave him a place to hide, and here the Spirit of God interrupted Saul's manhunt. Each of these events protected David from harm and even death. They were more than coincidences. Yeah. I'm almost done though. Yeah, but they were more than mere coincidence. As always, God is at work. If you remember, in Genesis, Joseph was thrown into a system by his brothers because they were jealous of him and they didn't like him and they thought Jacob loved him the most, which Jacob really did. And then the Ishmaelites came and they got him. The brothers sold him to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites went to Egypt, sold him to Potiphar. And God used that, not as a mere coincidence, but with divine intervention, and God used that to raise Joseph up to like this high position in Egypt, save him from famines, and would expand throughout Egypt. Pharaoh killed all those. Pharaoh, no, didn't. Well, Pharaoh did kill a bunch of the firstborns, but then he enslaved them because they were growing too much. And then Moses came into the big picture and led them out of Egypt. Not mere coincidence that all that happened because Joseph's brothers threw him to assist him. It's not like it's a butterfly effect. It's like God did all that. It's called divine intervention. When you are spared from harm, consider that God may be supernaturally protecting you because he has a further purpose for you in his work here on earth. Verse 5 of chapter 20 says, So David said, Look, tomorrow is the new moon feast, and I am supposed to dine with the king, but let me go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. At the beginning of each month, the Israelites gathered to celebrate the new moon festival. While this was mainly a time to be enjoyed, it was also a way to dedicate the next month to God. Other nations had celebrations during the full moon and worshipped the moon itself. The Israelites, however, celebrated the festival at the time of the new moon when the moon was not visible in the sky. This was an added precaution against false worship. Nothing in creation is to be worshipped. Only the Creator is supposed to be worshipped. Verse 15 says, And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. Jonathan asked David to keep a promise to treat his children kindly in the future. Years later, David took great pains to fulfill this promise. He invited Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, into his palace to eat at his table, which is in the next book that we're going to be reading. Verse 26 says, Saul said nothing that day, for he thought something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he is unclean. Because the new moon festival involved making a sacrifice to God, those attending the festival had to be ceremonially clean according to God's laws. This cleansing involved washing the body and clothes before approaching God to offer the sacrifice. The outward cleansing was a symbol of the inward desire for a purified heart and right relationship with God. Today our hearts are purified by faith in God through the death of Jesus Christ on our behalf. By reading and heeding God's words and by the work of the Holy Spirit in us. Verse 31 to 32 says, As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father. Saul was still trying to secure his throne for future generations, even though he had already been told his dynasty would end with him. Even worse, he was trying to do this by sinful human means, because he knew he would get no help from God. Jonathan could have made a move to become the next king by killing his rival, but he bypassed his opportunity because of his love for both God and David. Verses 1 to 6 of chapter 21 says that David went to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, Why are you alone? Why is no one with you? David answered Ahimelech the priest, The king sent me on a mission and said to me, No one is to know anything about this mission I am sending you on. As for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find. But the priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women. David replied, Indeed, women have been kept from us, as usual, whenever I set out. The men's bodies are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today? So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by the hot bread on the day it was taken away. This is the first time Ahimelech is mentioned. Either he was the Ahijah mentioned in chapter 14 or 18, or more likely he was Ahijah's successor. In either case, Ahimelech had to go against the law to give the consecrated bread to David because the bread was supposed to be given only to the priest. But Ahimelech put David's needs and life ahead of religious ceremony and fed him the consecrated food. This upheld a higher law of love. Centuries later, Jesus would refer to this incident to show that God's laws should be applied with compassion to do good and to save life. And to save life is God's greater law. David lied to protect himself from Saul. Some excuse this lie because a war was going on, and is the duty of a good soldier to deceive the enemy, but nowhere is David's lie condoned. In fact, the opposite is true because his lie led to the death of 85 priests. David's small lie seemed harmless enough, but it led to tragedy. The Bible makes it very clear that lying is wrong. Lying, like every other sin, is serious in God's sight and may lead to all sorts of harmful consequences. Don't minimize or categorize sins. All sins must be avoided, whether or not we can foresee their potential consequences. Once a week on the Sabbath, a priest would enter the holy place in a tabernacle and place 12 freshly baked loaves of bread on a small table. This bread, called the bread of the presence, symbolized God's presence among his people, as well as his loving care that met their physical needs. The bread that was replaced was to be eaten only by priests on duty. Jesus would one day refer to himself as the bread of life, reference to his ability to meet both our physical and spiritual needs. Verse 7 says, Now one of Saul's servants was there that day to tame before the Lord. He was Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief shepherd. We don't know why Doeg was detained at the tabernacle. Perhaps he had made some sort of vow, was waiting for a word from the Lord, or was kept there by some kind of impurity. Verse 9 says, The priest replied, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Eli, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one. David said, There is none like it. Give it to me. An ephod was a vest worn by a priest. David didn't know Goliath's sword was there, probably because David was a young man when he killed the giant and had spent much of his time at home. Verse 10 to 15 says, That day David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath, so he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gates and letting saliva run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, Look at this man, he is insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madman that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house? Gath was one of the 5 major Philistine cities. Why did the Philistines allow their arch-enemy David into their camp? They may have been initially happy to accept a defector who was a high military leader. Any enemy of Saul would have been a friend of theirs. They could not have known that David had been anointed Israel's next king. Soon, however, the Philistines became nervous about David's presence. After all, he had slain thousands of their people. David then protected himself by acting insane because it was the custom not to harm mentally unstable people. So, yeah, that's it. Next video will probably be a Saturday video or it might be a week video. I'm determining later today. Might do it later today, like 5 or 7 o'clock. Who knows? But yeah, I love 1 Samuel so much. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, my favorite books of the Old Testament, along with Ecclesiastes, of course. But Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Well, I thank you for today. I ask that you give us wisdom and understanding. I thank you for giving those two things throughout this reading today, Lord. I pray that your Spirit rests upon us, Lord, that if there's anyone suffering here, that they can suffer joyously, knowing that you will raise them up with your righteous right hand, Lord. I ask that if no one has you, that they can find you, and if they already do have you, that they continue to pursue you, Lord, and that they can pursue others in your name so that others may be able to pursue you as well, Lord. I ask that your love, joy, peace, kindness be shed upon us, Lord, that all the fruits of the Spirit will be activated within us, Lord, and that we can keep the evil desires of the flesh at bay and keep the devils and the sin away from us, Lord. Conquer all our evils, Lord, and destroy them, Lord. Push them into eternal fire, Lord, and keep away the evils of this world, Lord. I thank you for everything you have done, Lord. I praise you for everything you have done, Lord. Your name is the highest of all heavens, Lord, highest of all things created, Lord. No one is better than you, nor can anyone defeat you, Lord, because you are the greatest, you are the most powerful, Lord, and you are King of the universe and King of kings, Lord. I praise you and I thank you for everything you do, and I pray all this in your name. Amen. Good afternoon. God bless. Love y'all.